And then there's more due diligence, right? So DD is fairly extensive. And again, right, it's just you're dating, right? You've gone on a few dates. You've said, hey, I think I might be interested in a relationship. But you wouldn't get married without meeting their family, right? Without talking about what their values are. Do they even want to get married? Do they want to have kids, right? Like, where do they want to live, right? There's a whole host of things that you're going to have discussions about. And that's what this DD is like, right? You're doing that additional due diligence to make sure you understand each other and understand whether it's a arrangement you want to move forward with. And again, you need to be doing your own DD on the investor as well, right? If you decide this is not a good fit for us, as hard as it can be, you need to pull out and say, no, that we're not going to move forward, right? Because not every investor is the right fit. The challenge for many founders is that you need money, so you're willing to say, all right, maybe they're not quite what we need, but sure, we'll take the money, right? And then that's what creates issues later on. So make sure you're doing your diligence as well to ensure that it's the right fit for you too. And what they do during this portion, we have their kind of be aware valuation impact. If it is an equity investment, again, I mentioned earlier that valuation is an art as much as it is a science, right? And what we often find is that companies come and they say, look, my business is worth $6 million. So if you give me 1 million, right, it's an exact percentage. The truth is, right, you can run your models, and this is what will help companies put together. But you need to think about what are the different potential scenarios, right? Because an investor will say, okay, you're basing this, right? Say you're basing it on future cash flows. There are different ways to value your business. But let's say you're using kind of a discounted cash flow model. An investor might say, well, actually, I don't think you're going to achieve those growth targets in year 3. So your business is valued a little bit less. Or you don't have the team in place to execute on this. How does that affect your cash flow projections, right? You need to think through what are the different scenarios that might impact your valuation, or what if the market completely tanks, right? What if the kwacha depreciates 50% in the next few months, and your loans are in hard currency, right? So, and say it's a convertible debt, right? All of those factors will influence it. So you need to think through, what will an investor find when I go through this process that might impact that valuation? And be ready to push back on those and be ready to have that discussion. Because you will have your numbers. What will happen is the investors will have, here's what we think the business is worth. You will say, here's what we think it's worth based on your own valuations. And ideally you meet somewhere in the middle. Right? And it's usually a negotiation, it's usually a discussion. There's no hard and fast number to say it's either this or walk away. And unfortunately, some founders will do that, and then you lose a deal because you weren't willing to give on your valuation. Right? And lastly, then we get to, a little bit more on due diligence. So I thought it might be helpful just to lay out what are some of the things investors will look for before we get to the closing. Right? So as I said, it's going to be fairly detailed. So on this side, these are kind of all the formal things that they're going to want to see. They want to see your financial statements, understand what your margins are. People know what EBITDA is? Okay, so on your profit and loss statement, right, just showing kind of how much money you made, what your costs were for that. You have a section at the bottom called earnings before interest and taxes, and then DA's depreciation and amortization. But essentially just looking to understand, when I take all the money that came in, everything that it cost you in order to make that money, how much did you come out with, right? Before we start accounting for taxes, et cetera. Because they're going to want to understand that today, as well as what do we think that looks like in the future. All your financial statements, valuation of the business, as well as evaluating your model, right? You need to lay out for them, what does our organizational structure look like? What do our teams look like? Who handles different responsibilities? And then what does the market look like? Why do we think we're well positioned? Who's our competition? How do we compare to them? What does our pricing look like? What do our customers care about? And how do we meet those needs, right? Those are all things that you want to have documented in some way that you can then speak to with your investors, because they want to understand all of that if they're going to give you money. And that's the formal part. But then there's also kind of all the informal stuff as well, right? They're going to want to find out more about the business. They're going to want to know about your team, understand Can they trust in you, and do they believe in you? And that's especially challenging when you're working with foreign investors, right? It's not like they can just show up to your business anytime and catch up with you, right? So they've got to feel like this is a business I can trust. They have all the structures in place that make me feel like they will use the money effectively. I remember the last time I gave a talk like this, someone asked, essentially like, if an investor gives money, how much of it can I take, to kind of reimburse myself for all the work that I've done, right? An investor needs to feel like if I give you money, it's not going into your pocket, it's going into the business. So, and the challenge there is like, it can feel like as an entrepreneur, I've put in so much work, I deserve something for all the sweat and tears, and as well as you're the one who likely funded the business yourself, right? But when the investor gives you money, it's for the business, it's not for you. So as hard as that can be, you need to demonstrate to the investors that they can trust you with that money, right? We already know there's plenty of corruption in Zambia already, and we as entrepreneurs can't contribute to that, right? So the other thing just to think about very quickly is the different types of questions that different types of investors will ask. So DD, the goal is always the same, but investors' priorities might be slightly different. Right? So angel investors, as I mentioned earlier, because the business is still really early, you're still proving it, they're often really betting on the team. Right? They're saying, we think this group of people, even if they haven't figured it out yet, can really build a business that we can get behind and we think will allow us to make money. Right? You look at any kind of large-scale business, they started out very different. Right? Look at Google. They started out as just like a search engine, and now they offer this whole suite of products that are drastically different than anything that their founders may have thought they would do at the start, right? So you need to, angel investors care about, does this team bring confidence in me, and do I think they will actually scale and make money? While venture capitalists are looking at a slightly different priorities, right? So again, as you think about the type of investors that come in, you want to make sure that you are a business that fits their mandate, but then you've also prepared for the types of questions that they will have. Right? For example, venture capitalists often, funds, impact funds, et cetera, folks who are not angel investors, they usually have an internal investment committee. Right? So you might give them all your stuff, they think, all right, we want to work with this business, we want to invest, but they have a committee they have to go to who has to sign off on that. And if that committee, that committee is reviewing a whole bunch of potential businesses at the same time. And if they decide not to, right, you then don't get that investment. So you have to also think about what does that committee need to see? Not just the couple of people who have done the DD, who have worked with me, but what do they need to see, right? And then think about all the other factors around risk that the business, the investors will be evaluating, right? They'll look at legal risk, they'll look at market risk, they'll look at team risk. So there's a whole bunch of things that you need to be ready for during investment. And lastly, closing an investment. So this is the piece where you actually ideally sign the term sheets and get the money. Again, this can actually take some time because you're negotiating that term sheet. It has to go through the investor, it has to go through their investor committee, depending on the type of investor. And just because you've signed doesn't mean you get the money immediately. Right? Often we see it might take a few weeks, it might take a couple months before those funds actually hit your bank account. And again, that's the point about making sure you're prepared well enough in advance. Right? You don't want to say, all right, I've got 6 months to raise financing, and come month 7, that's it, we're done, right? If we don't get the money, nothing comes in, right? Because you might get to month 6 and someone said, yes, I'll give you money, but they may not send it till month 8 because they have their processes that they need to go through. And at that point, you also need to make sure you get lawyers involved, right? And this is something we always tell our clients, like, we can help you through all of this. We can help you negotiate the commercial and control terms of your term sheet. We can help you with evaluation. We can help you with preparing for due diligence. But when you're signing a legal contract, we're not lawyers. Make sure you hire good lawyers to review that for you because they will bring a different lens and a different aspect to it as well. So that's pretty much everything that I had today.